Just picture it. Hundreds of millions of tons of concrete, steel, and water working together every single second to hold back one of the most powerful rivers on Earth. The Yangtze River has carved its way through the heart of China for millions of years, and it's been both a source of life and destruction. But since the early 2000s, it's been controlled by the massive wall of the Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroelectric power plant ever built. It stretches for over 2,300 meters across and stands 185 meters tall, almost the height of a 60-story skyscraper. Behind it, a reservoir stretching over 600 kilometers long and holding back more than 39 billion cubic meters of water. That's over 5 trillion gallons. Now this thing is not just big, it's a modern marvel. The Three Gorges Dam wasn't just built for show, it was built with two major goals in mind: stop the Yangtze's constant flooding and produce a huge amount of clean energy, and in many ways it's done both. When the last main turbine came online in the year 2012, the dam reached its full capacity in Altio, 22,500 megawatts, which is enough to power tens of millions of homes. In the year 2020, after an especially intense monsoon season, it hit a world record, generating over 111 terawatt hours of electricity in just 1 year. That broke the record set by Brazil's Itaipu Dam. But here's the thing about it. While it was built to protect and power, the dam now stands as a massive potential threat. The bigger something is, the harder it hits when it falls. If the Three Gorges Dam were to collapse, even partially, the effects wouldn't just be felt in the areas right below it. The disaster would reach across an entire region and ripple out through the entire world. Hundreds of millions of people live and work in cities scattered all along the Yangtze River. These include places like Yichang, right below the dam, and larger cities like Wuhan and Nanjing, farther downriver. These places are not just home to millions. They're packed with infrastructure, agriculture, factories, and key shipping routes. So now comes the big question: how could something so massive and so carefully engineered actually fail? What would it take? Let's start with the most basic problem: gravity and water pressure. That massive wall of water behind the dam, it's always pushing forward. The structure is built to handle that, but just barely. Like every major dam in the Three Gorges is constantly under stress. Over time, even small movements in the concrete or shifts in the foundation can start to cause problems. And the Yangtze River itself adds to the danger. It's one of the muddiest rivers in the world, and that matters. Every year, around 40 million tons of sediment move downstream. But with the dam in the way, a lot of that silt ends up piling up behind it. Over time, that buildup puts even more pressure on the base of the dam, making the water harder to manage and the structure more vulnerable. Now here's where things get more complicated. The dam sits on a fault line, not a super active one like in California or Japan, but active enough that earthquakes do happen. And scientists have been warning for years about something called reservoir-induced seismicity. Basically, all that water pressing down on the earth can trigger quakes on its own. There's another problem too: landslides. When the water level in the reservoir rises, it loosens the soil around the edges. Since the reservoir was filled, there have now been dozens of major landslides, some so powerful they've caused waves inside the reservoir itself. In one case, tens of thousands of cubic meters of earth and rock came crashing into the water in seconds. Imagine what that could do if the landslide happened right near the dam wall. Even though Chinese officials monitor the dam closely and carry out maintenance and inspections, some experts have pointed out that the original construction may not have been perfect. One hydrologist, Wang Weilo, raised red flags about how the design, construction, and inspection were all handled by the same group. He warned that cracks, rushed schedules, and poor quality materials could come back to haunt the structure down the road. So now we're left with this picture: an aging mega dam holding back one of the largest reservoirs on Earth, sitting in a place prone to earthquakes, dealing with increasing sediment buildup, surrounded by unstable slopes, and facing stronger and more unpredictable storms every year. It hasn't failed yet. But if something went wrong, even one thing, it could be the beginning of a chain reaction, and once that chain starts, there may be no way to stop it. Next, we're going to break down exactly how that failure might unfold. For Dinaos, the conditions that would line up, the timeline of collapse, and what cities would be hit first. It's not just about whether it could happen, no what. It's about how fast, how far, and how horrifying it really could be. It's easy to look at the Three Gorges Dam and just see strength. After all, we're talking about a wall of concrete that's over 2,300 meters long and about 185 meters high. But behind all that concrete is a system that's constantly under stress: physical, environmental, and human. It's a complicated machine built into one of the most unpredictable rivers on Earth. And the truth is, there's a long list of ways things could start to unravel. Let's start with one of the biggest concerns: seismic activity. The dam is built in a region of China that sits on several fault lines. Normally we think of earthquakes as something that just happens out of nowhere, but in this case, the weight of the reservoir itself, billions of tons of water pressing down on the Earth, can trigger what's called reservoir-induced seismicity. That means earthquakes that wouldn't normally happen might occur just because of the stress the water puts on the crust beneath it. Some scientists believe that dozens of small tremors recorded in the region since the reservoir was filled are likely linked to this exact phenomenon. A small quake might be manageable, but a big one, even just in the wrong spot, could push the structure past its limits. There's also the issue of landslides. Ever since the water level rose behind the dam, the steep terrain along the reservoir has been eroding. That's not just theory, there have been real events already. In May of 2009, huge chunks of land slid into the water at Wuxia Gorge, sending shock waves across the surface. In the first few months of 2010 alone, nearly 100 major landslides were reported in the reservoir zone. That might not sound like a direct threat to the dam, but the sediment and debris from those landslides flow toward the dam, slowly clogging the reservoir. That raises water levels, increases pressure on the structure, and decreases the amount of water it can safely hold during floods. Over time, this puts the entire system into a tighter and tighter corner. Now let's talk sediment. The Yangtze River has always carried a massive load of silt and mud. Before the dam was built, much of that sediment flowed downstream naturally, keeping the river's ecosystem in balance and reinforcing the riverbanks all the way to the coast. But now, most of that sediment settles in the reservoir. In fact, estimates suggest that about 40 million tons of sediment pour into the dam each year. With slower water flow above the dam, there's nowhere for it to go. It just builds up. That buildup doesn't just reduce capacity, it shifts water pressure onto different parts of the dam and alters how water flows through its turbines and spillways. The result is a system that's constantly adjusting to an ever-changing internal load, and that kind of pressure over time wears things down. Then you've got aging materials. The main dam was structurally completed in 2006, but that doesn't mean it was left alone. In fact, the full power station only became fully operational in 2012. And the final part of the project, a massive ship lift, wasn't finished until 2015. That means different parts of the structure were completed at different times, and they've been weathering the elements for over a decade now. Concrete expands and contracts with heat and cold. Steel corrodes, seals degrade. It all adds up over time. Engineers inspect and maintain the dam constantly, but some experts have raised concerns that early construction might not have met the highest standards. Hydrologist Wang Weilo, one of the loudest voices of criticism, has even claimed there were signs of cracking during construction and possible issues with concrete quality. These claims haven't been confirmed by the government, but they add to the worry that not everything behind the scenes is rock solid. One of the more delicate balancing acts the dam has to manage is between energy generation and flood control. When the reservoir is full, the dam can generate its maximum output of electricity. But in flood season, the water level has to be lowered ahead of time to create space for incoming rain. That trade-off creates a constant back and forth between power production and safety. If heavy rains come sooner or harder than expected, the operators might not have enough time to lower the reservoir, and that could raise the risk of overtopping, where water spills uncontrollably over the top of the dam. Even though the dam is equipped with emergency spillways, a sudden surge, say from a failed upstream dam or a monster storm, could overwhelm the system. And extreme weather isn't just a possibility anymore. Climate change is pushing rainfall patterns into new territory. The summer of 2020 saw record-breaking floods in China, pushing the Three Gorges Dam to its limits. The water level rose to over 165 meters, very close to its designed maximum of 175 meters. In response, authorities opened floodgates, unleashing flows of more than 70,000 cubic meters per second to try and lower the pressure. But with each flood season, the margin for error seems to shrink. And this year, June of 2025, weather forecasts are predicting another season of intense rainfall. Engineers are already working to lower the reservoir, but no one knows if that will be enough. So, when you put it all together, earthquakes, landslides, sedimentation, aging infrastructure, and increasingly extreme weather, you can start to see how a chain reaction might begin. The dam doesn't have to fail in one big moment. It could be a slow buildup of smaller issues, stacking up until something finally gives, and if it does, the next part of the story begins. What happens when a wall of water starts racing toward some of the most populated cities on Earth? That's what we'll explore next. If the Three Gorges Dam were to collapse, the destruction would be unlike anything China or the world has ever seen. This isn't just a local disaster. This would be a chain reaction of flooding, infrastructure failure, and mass displacement on an unimaginable scale. To understand how devastating it could be, we have to follow the water step by step, city by city, hour by hour. The first to be hit would be Yichang, the city closest to the dam. Yichang sits less than 40 kilometers downstream. Within minutes, a wall of water tens of meters high could crash into its streets, wiping out homes, power lines, and transportation routes. Most residents would have little or no time to escape. Bridges would collapse. Roads would vanish under waves of debris-filled water. The force of that initial surge could be enough to destroy every structure in its path. But the water wouldn't stop at Yichang. It would keep moving downstream, building momentum as it rushed through the Yangtze River Basin. Within hours, the flood could reach Jingzhou, a historic city with a population of over 5 million people. Much of Jingzhou lies on flat land near the river. That geography means slower drainage and deeper flooding. Even if early warnings were issued, evacuation would be chaotic, transportation would be overwhelmed, and low-lying neighborhoods could be completely submerged. Next, the water would bear down on Wuhan. This is not just a large city, it's a mega-city. Over 11 million people live in Wuhan, and it's a key hub for finance, transportation, and technology. 3 major rivers, including the Yangtze and Han, converge there. If floodwaters from upstream hit Wuhan at the same time as heavy local rainfall, the result would be catastrophic. Subways would flood, the airport would be rendered useless, power stations, water treatment facilities, and hospitals could all be knocked offline. Rescue efforts would be nearly impossible in the early hours, and tens of thousands of lives could be at risk. The damage would continue far beyond Wuhan. Cities like Yichang, Nanjing, and even Shanghai, over 1,000 kilometers away, could feel the effects. While the force of the water would weaken over that distance, the volume would remain staggering. In lower areas, floodwaters could spread across vast swaths of farmland, drowning crops and displacing rural communities. Ports and industrial zones along the Yangtze River would be paralyzed. Highways and railway lines would be washed out. The cost to China's economy alone could stretch into the trillions of dollars. One of the most devastating long-term effects would be the collapse of the interconnected dam and levee systems along the Yangtze River. The Three Gorges Dam is part of a larger network of over 100,000 dams across the country, many of which are smaller and older. If the Three Gorges Dam failed, the flood would likely breach several of these structures as it surged downstream. Each failed dam would release more water, compounding the disaster and spreading it wider. Entire provinces could see their water systems permanently altered. And then there's the human cost. Conservative estimates suggest that over 400 million people live within the greater Yangtze River Basin. Even if only a fraction of those people were directly affected, we're still talking about tens of millions displaced. Millions more could face shortages of clean water, food, and shelter. Disease outbreaks, especially in overcrowded evacuation centers, would be a serious risk. With supply chains cut and medical infrastructure damaged, emergency response teams would struggle to keep up. It would take weeks, possibly months, for aid to reach all the areas in need. Environmental damage would be another hidden but massive problem. The reservoir behind the Three Gorges Dam contains not only water, but also industrial runoff, sewage, and heavy metals that have settled there over years. If the dam failed, all of that would be swept downstream. Toxic materials could contaminate farmland, rivers, and coastal waters. The Yangtze River Delta, one of China's most fertile and economically vital regions, could be poisoned for years to come. In global terms, the collapse of the Three Gorges Dam would also disrupt international trade. Ports like Shanghai and Ningbo handle a significant percentage of China's exports. If those ports were flooded or cut off from rail and road transport, it would affect supply chains around the world. Factories would shut down. Prices for electronics, clothing, machinery, and other goods would spike globally. The economic ripple effect would be felt in Europe, North America, Southeast Asia, and beyond. But beyond all the statistics and projections, The heart of the tragedy would be the human stories. Families separated, entire neighborhoods erased, generations of history drowned in minutes. In many ways, the Three Gorges Dam was built to protect people from exactly this kind of nightmare. But if it were to fail, it wouldn't just be a collapse of concrete, it would be a collapse of trust, of planning, and of an entire way of life for millions. In the next part, we'll explore how prepared China is for such a worst-case scenario, and whether the systems in place today would be enough to stop the unthinkable from becoming reality. When it comes to the potential collapse of the Three Gorges Dam, the Chinese government has not been silent. There are emergency plans in place, but whether they are enough is another question entirely. A structure as massive and consequential as this demands a coordinated and layered defense system. Yet even with decades of planning, some cracks cannot be patched with paperwork alone. First, it's important to understand what kind of monitoring and early warning systems are already active. The Three Gorges Dam is equipped with thousands of sensors that measure pressure, stress, water levels, and seismic activity. These sensors transmit real-time data to control centers in Yichang and Beijing. Engineers claim that the dam can withstand earthquakes up to magnitude 7 and has overflow spillways designed to reduce pressure during extreme flooding. But no amount of data can offer total certainty. If the dam fails suddenly due to sabotage, a landslide, or a rare upstream earthquake, these systems would only provide seconds or minutes of warning to those in the path of destruction. Beyond the dam itself, China has developed a tiered emergency response structure. This includes local, provincial, and national crisis management teams. In theory, evacuation plans are regularly reviewed and practiced in some downstream cities. Large urban centers like Wuhan and Nanjing have contingency plans that include siren alerts, emergency broadcasts, and designated evacuation routes. Drones, satellite imaging, and even artificial intelligence tools are being used to track weather patterns and detect potential structural anomalies, but planning does not always translate into execution. One of the main challenges is geography. The areas most at risk lie along the Yangtze River, one of the most densely populated river basins on Earth. Some villages and towns are isolated or surrounded by mountains, with only narrow roads in and out. In such places, evacuation efforts could be delayed by traffic, poor communication, or landslides triggered by heavy rain. In larger cities, roads are often congested even during normal times. A mass evacuation of millions within a few hours is nearly impossible. There is also the question of political control. The Chinese government tightly manages public information. In the past, warnings about structural issues with dams or floods have been delayed, downplayed, or withheld altogether to avoid public panic. During the 2021 floods in Zhengzhou, for example, official reports did not fully capture the severity of the disaster until after the worst damage had occurred. If a similar pattern of secrecy happened during a Three Gorges emergency, valuable time could be lost, time that could save lives. In addition, while the Three Gorges Dam is the largest hydroelectric project in the world, China has over 98,000 other dams, many of them smaller, older, and more vulnerable. These dams form a cascading system of water control. If the Three Gorges Dam were to fail, that would place immense pressure on this entire system. The failure of even a handful of secondary dams downstream could make the disaster significantly worse, and unlike the main structure, many of these smaller dams are not as well monitored or maintained. On top of all this, military assets would likely be mobilized in the event of a collapse. The People's Liberation Army has rapid response units trained for flood rescue and logistics. Boats, helicopters, and temporary shelters could be deployed to major cities and evacuation zones, but again, scale is the issue. It is one thing to rescue thousands, it is another to respond to tens of millions needing aid all at once. If supply chains are broken, bridges washed away, and power grids offline, even the best equipped teams will struggle. China has made some efforts to improve community-level preparedness in schools and factories. Some citizens undergo annual emergency drills. Government apps can push evacuation alerts directly to smartphones. Civil defense shelters have been converted in some regions to handle flood refugees, yet access to these resources is uneven. Many rural areas still lack digital infrastructure or reliable emergency communication. International cooperation is also limited. Due to political tensions and national security concerns, the Chinese government does not openly share structural data on the Three Gorges Dam with other nations. This makes outside assessment difficult and hinders offers of international assistance. If the dam were to fail, countries downstream, especially those reliant on Chinese supply chains, would receive little advance notice or coordination. One key blind spot in China's emergency planning is environmental fallout. While the focus has largely been on water and human evacuation, there is less clarity on how the government would contain chemical spills or manage water-borne diseases in flooded areas. Large-scale flooding often causes sewage, overflow, industrial leakage, and hazardous contamination. In the chaos of mass displacement, it is unlikely that environmental mitigation would be prioritized. In short, China has systems in place to monitor, respond to, and possibly manage a dam-related emergency, but none of them have ever been tested at the scale of a complete Three Gorges failure. Even with the most advanced technology, fastest troops, and strictest planning, the sheer size of the population and the speed at which such a disaster would unfold leave a terrifying question. Would any of it be enough? In the final part, we will examine the long-term consequences of a collapse, not just for China, but for the world. From food security and energy disruption to political fallout and global markets, the failure of this dam would echo far beyond the riverbanks. If the Three Gorges Dam collapsed, the devastation would not stop at China's borders. What begins as a physical disaster could rapidly spiral into an economic, environmental, and geopolitical crisis on a global scale. In this final part, we look beyond the immediate flood zones to explore how the world might feel the shock waves of a failure that would alter global systems overnight. To begin, China plays a central role in the global economy. It is the world's largest manufacturing hub and the largest exporter of goods. The Yangtze River Basin is home to more than 400 million people and contributes more than 40% of the country's GDP. Major industrial cities like Wuhan, Chongqing, and Nanjing rely heavily on the transportation, water, and power infrastructure connected to the dam. If that infrastructure is destroyed, it would trigger an immediate collapse in manufacturing output, especially in electronics, automotive parts, and heavy machinery. The supply chain disruption would be massive. Ports and railways in the region would be paralyzed. Global companies that depend on Chinese factories, ranging from consumer tech brands to pharmaceutical giants, would experience immediate shortages. Products could disappear from shelves around the world within weeks. Shipping delays would skyrocket. Prices on raw materials and finished goods would spike, contributing to inflation in already fragile global markets. The energy impact would also be severe. The Three Gorges Dam is the single largest hydroelectric power station in the world. If it fails, its massive contribution to China's grid, around 2% of national energy, would vanish. While this percentage may sound small, it supports critical infrastructure in eastern and central China, including power for hospitals, water treatment plants, and communication systems. Rolling blackouts could follow across several provinces, straining emergency response and industrial recovery. Environmental consequences would not be limited to floodwaters. The Yangtze is a vital artery for agriculture and ecology. Its basin supports rice, wheat, and fish production for hundreds of millions. A sudden collapse would destroy crops, spread industrial toxins from submerged factories, and kill off entire aquatic ecosystems. This could lead to long-term food shortages within China and affect global food trade, particularly in Asia and Africa, where Chinese agricultural exports are critical. International financial markets would react instantly. Investors often respond to disasters with panic, and a collapse of this scale would send shockwaves through stock exchanges in Hong Kong, Tokyo, London, and New York. China's currency could fall, foreign investment could stall, and insurance firms with exposure to Chinese assets would face massive payouts. The economic ripple effect would likely trigger recessions in multiple countries, especially those closely tied to China through trade or debt. Then there's the political dimension. A collapse of the Three Gorges Dam would be seen not just as a natural disaster, but as a national failure. It is one of China's proudest infrastructure achievements, a symbol of power, progress, and engineering superiority. If it failed, the Chinese Communist Party could face intense public backlash. Protests could break out, especially if the government was seen as hiding information or mishandling the response. In the worst-case scenario, such a collapse could threaten internal political stability. Internationally, tensions could rise. Neighboring countries downriver, such as Vietnam, might demand answers or compensation if they are affected by flooding, or water shortages, some nations may accuse China of negligence or failing to maintain a project with global consequences. At the same time, geopolitical rivals might exploit the chaos to gain influence or negotiate more favorable trade terms. Cyber attacks, misinformation campaigns, and border tensions could all increase as a result. Humanitarian aid would become another flashpoint. If China requested or accepted international assistance, questions would arise about coordination, transparency, and access. Foreign governments and NGOs may be hesitant or restricted in what they are allowed to do. The sheer number of displaced people, possibly tens of millions, would overwhelm aid systems, and China might be forced to prioritize urban recovery over rural survival. This would raise serious ethical concerns and could strain relations with other countries already dealing with global refugee crises. In the long term, the collapse would permanently reshape how nations view megaprojects and large-scale dams. For decades, the Three Gorges Dam has been cited as an example of engineering ambition. Its failure could chill future hydroelectric investment, trigger stricter international engineering codes, and increase skepticism of top-down infrastructure development. At the same time, countries may double down on decentralizing power grids and water management systems to avoid similar catastrophes. Ultimately, the failure of the Three Gorges Dam would be more than a Chinese disaster. It would be a global turning point. From the floodplains of central China to the trading floors of distant financial capitals, every corner of the world would feel its impact. Whether through broken supply chains, rising prices, shifting alliances, or the haunting image of a drowned megastructure, the collapse would mark the end of one era and the start of something far less stable.